rows basically, and variable x and variable y, and then you calculate xy, then you also calculate x square and y square. Okay. So did you make the table?
Yes.
Okay. And then you will have to do a summation. So the last one, at the very last, when you have all the data, you will do summation for all the columns. Apart from the index one, you will do summation for all of them. Make sense? Okay. Now here is your equation. This is the value for R, or row as we like to say. N is the number of pairs of scores. Basically, it is the total number of rows in data. It is n into summation of xy minus summation of x and into summation of y divided by under root of n into summation of x square minus summation of x complete square. Okay. Into n of summation of y square negative, you take summation of y and square that value. Okay. This will give you basically the value of R, or Pearson product related moment coefficient. Okay. And you will have to just plug in the values to get this one. So just give it a simple try. Everyone have noted down this value? Okay. Sorry. Okay, guys, go ahead and solve this. Tell me so sample of 6 children. You don't have to do much, but just use a calculator. Okay, it will be slightly faster for you guys.
Sir, can you go
So
with the formula, please? So I can just write it down quickly.
yeah, please, guys, if you ever like are taking time, always take a screenshot first, and then do it. Okay.
Okay, good idea. Yeah, doing that.
Okay, and this is the data. So please note down the data as well, or you can take a screenshot. So the serial number you can ignore, that is just an index, or that is just number of rows. And you have to just find the correlation between age and weight. So it is a sample of 6 children, and their information of in years and weight in kilograms was recorded in the following table. And the correlation coefficient R between age and weight you have to find. So again, it's a sample, so we will call it small r. And okay, so there are 6 values, 6 pair of values. So why don't you guys get started? Make sure to note down all the values correctly, or take a screenshot just in case. So plug in all the values here, okay, in this table, get the summation values, and then plug in all the values here in this equation. Use your calculator, it will be much faster.
It's 24.98.
Sorry, how can you get 4.98? The value will be either it will be in range of -1 to +1, right?
Okay.
So please be careful with
There
your
is
results.
some problem.
Any other answers? Gayatri, I hope you understand that that answer can't be true.
Sir, I'm getting 0.95, 0.95.
0.95. Check your maths, miss. I think it is not exactly correct. You're close, but this is not. I think
Okay,
maybe
I'll just
that's
check.
not.
Yeah,
Just check one. Check your maths once. Okay, just check
just
it.
check. Oh, it should be 6. I'm sorry. I took sigma as NS7. It should be 6. That's correct.
Yeah, and it's 6 here, guys. Be careful because there are total 6 rows of informations only.
0.7595, I think. Just a
Okay,
minute.
let's see. Because I am lazy, so I'm not gonna do all the work anyways. Okay. Basically, what you can also do is you can put them into arrays and you can just get it. So if you're getting anything 0.75955,
Yeah.
you are basically going in the right direction.
0.95.
So you can put all of the 6 values rather, let's say if you don't want to calculate all together. Sorry, because I did not do the import part. So if you were to run this, so if just feeding those same values here in age and weight, and if just calculating correlation coefficient, you get 75955. So whoever is getting like 7573 something like that, you are getting the right answer. Okay. How many people have gotten this answer already?
Yeah, I got exactly this
Yeah,
0.75.
of course. No, if you do the maths, you should get exactly this answer. So now you know how to calculate correlation, although it's a very, very rare chance that anyone is ever gonna really ask you to calculate things like this. Okay. You can always remember in NP, you will run a correlation coefficient function and it is simply called CORR function in pandas. So you just need to convert the data into either pandas or NumPy and you can get the Pearson correlation coefficient immediately. Okay. But rather than doing the math, basically what I want you to understand is what is the part correlation plays. Because you, even in machine learning, you might see some examples where we'll have to worry, especially during the projects, to remove how to remove multicollinearity. Basically, that is the correlation point. Okay. I hope everyone has gotten this answer. Yeah, wonderful. Okay. Now, because we have covered sampling and correlation already, so now we are well equipped to handle the mass or the ideas that we will face in inferential statistics. So whatever mostly you have studied is descriptive statistics. So what is descriptive statistics? It basically describes the features of the data, like your central tendencies and the variation, the range, IQR. Okay. So whatever we were doing, we were trying to understand the properties of data. And now what we are going to do is we are going to take an inference, okay, or we are going to make certain inferences about data. So, okay, general meaning of inference means what?
Getting to a conclusion.
Sorry.
Getting a conclusion.
Conclusion. Okay. Any other answer that you think inference? What inference means?
Guess.
Estimation.
Estimation. Yeah, you can also think it as like a, how do I say?
Derivation.
Implying
Conclusion is a
from some
Implication,
fact.
basically. Yeah, implication of the fact. Yeah, that is a very good answer. Or any kind of educated guess that you can make. Means educated means you should have some mathematical basis for that. Okay, you should not just make a blind guess. You cannot call a blind guess as an inference. Okay, it has to have some mathematical basis. So any kind of mathematical implication that I'm gonna make after a while, after doing some maths, that is might be called as inference. So what is the point of statistical inference? First of all, let's discuss that because that is actually more important. First of all. So I say the word statistical inference. What is the point of even doing statistical inference? First of all,
To take some decision.
of course, inference will lead to some decision, but why we are worried about the inference part?
Because we cannot analyze entire population.
Exactly, very good answer. Look, in statistics, dealing with the whole population is gonna be hard, okay? And even when you will go and learn or do some projects with GBs and TBs of data, you will realize that maybe taking all the data is not a good way to solve the problem, okay? Maybe you can just take 1/10 of the data, right? Maybe you can just take 1/10 of data or maybe 1/20th of data. And that should be even close enough to the actual answer. Remember your sampling sampling example that you guys did and you were trying to calculate the mean and the standard deviation over there. And you saw as you increase the sample from 100 to 1000 and then to 10,000, which one was more closer to the population truth or population mean and standard deviation?
The larger sample.
The larger sample. So the idea is there could exist, given the range of error, you will have to tell the confidence interval, and given the range of error, there could exist something or some optimal value of a sample which could do my work or which could solve my problems without reaching or without even having the access to the whole population. Okay. So that is where statistical inference plays its part, that when you have to make inference about something in future based on sample, not on the whole population, then if you already know the population, there is not much to do. But inference is about taking a smaller sample and making the inferences again, which are very close to the population truth as well. Okay. Is this part, just this idea is clear, like why we require inference at all? Okay. So basically, statistical inference is the process of making guess or inference about the truth from a sample, not from the population, because you are not really inferring anything. Then you actually already know the truth about the population. You already have figured out things, so you don't need to actually make inference over there. If the way the process is clean, it should not. There is no part of inference over there. If you already have the access to whole population, and if you can solve that issue, so there is no point of doing a statistical inference then. Okay, now before we go any forward, like first will have to understand a simple concept, not simple really, but it is actually useful. Okay, so in probability theory, basically the idea is something is called central limit theorem. Anyone has heard or know about what is central limit theorem? So I have a small CLT demo, kind of a central limit theorem demo. So first, let's try to understand what is central limit theorem itself. So in probability theory, we established this that when independent random variables are added, their properly normalized curve or normalized sum tends to towards a normal distribution. Even the original variables themselves are not normally distributed. Means what it means is, even if you take different samples which have different distribution, uh, but if you sum them and average them fundamentally, they will start to mimic a Gaussian distribution or informally a bell curve. Okay. So whatever you do, if you do it large times, and if you were to sum it, and if you were to kind of take average out of it, it looks like a Gaussian after a while. Okay, and let me give you a small demo now. So
One question before you go
yeah,
there. Uh, I've heard this term so many times, normalization of data. So what does normalization mean? Dividing by the total, is it? What is
yeah, you can. Okay, it's a simple idea I can give you. Okay, so one variable, let's say x1 and x2. So x1 variable goes from 1 to 10. Okay, x2 variable goes 1 to 1000. Okay. Now tell me which is more influential or which change might be a bigger change. Is it change in x1? Delta x1 means change in x1. So x1 changed from 2 to 3. It became 2 to 3. So it was 2 and then it became 3. Or change in x2 is bigger, where it was already 55 and now it is 87. Can you tell me which change is bigger?
yeah. X1 is bigger in terms of
No. In
percentage.
absolute terms, actually x2 is bigger.
Yeah, in absolute terms, yeah, but
But
in terms
you
of the
understand this concept, but computer doesn't understand this concept. Understand? So yeah, this is what the part of normalization comes. That basically we both have to bring both of the. So let's divide x1 by 10, and let's divide x2 by 1000. Now they both will exist in the scale of 0 to 1, and the idea is now it is a fair comparison.
okay, so then delta is
Many
becomes
times, yeah, many times like dividing is just nothing but kind of averaging it out. Okay.
oh, got that. Okay.
Exactly. So try to understand again, normalization and scaling will come in machine learning as well as a pre-processing step. So over there, we will discuss this again. Okay. But yeah, good question overall. And you
Yeah.
should know this, what is normalization or scaling basically, because different variables or different accesses could have different sensitivity level. Okay. So how do you measure like they are same or not? So unless they are not in same scale, how can I measure?
Yeah, yeah, got it. Thanks.
Okay, understood? It is like, again, you can take like, how do you measure the contribution of a bowler and a batsman? Like a bowler in one inning can still maximum take 10 wickets, right?
Yeah.
So if you just put pure numbers like 10 and a person hits 100, that's not a fair comparison, is it? Like, because the wiping out 10 means he wiped out singly, he or she wiped out the whole team. Still scoring 100, like if you was whole team scored 350 and you scored 100, it is less than it is close to 30% of the contribution only. But in pure numbers, that is never like understood, right? A bowler taking 500 wickets is a much bigger deal, according to me, than scoring 10,000 runs. But how would you compare?
Yeah, got it. So you have to
So,
bring it down to a common measure. Something.
common measure. So a lot of people, what they do is they will take like per wicket average is what, like let's say a team scores 300 runs in a match. So they will average it out that per wicket value is 30 runs. But even that is not correct, right? Because tailenders will usually score very less, and opening batsmen like 6-7 players from top will have a capacity of scoring 150 or 100 runs. Okay, so let's say if you get Virat Kohli or Rohit Sharma out, you have basically saved 100 runs, maybe potentially. Okay, let's say if you get some bowler out, then mostly you have saved 20 runs only. So that's the problem, right? You will face this problem many times comparing different domains, or even how to contribute a value of a tester and a programmer.
Yeah.
Try to consider a metric and you will go paranoid after a while. Like how to put any measure, like you can give rankings and stuff, but that doesn't really solve the problem. So you will face this problem a lot. It is not always that simple. Sometimes it requires a conceptual, behind the scenes knowledge that you need to understand how things really work. So if you just directly do a numbers game, it is not going to work. Okay.
But then, yeah, got it. Thanks. Yeah, because then you use some weighted average or something. But yeah, understood.
No weighted average or some kind of make believe metrics also have to be taken. Okay. So again, there are different ideas that are floating around, and some work, some doesn't work. Okay. Again, I cannot say that all the ideas which I am throwing at you will always work. No, I'm just telling that there could be something you could do, but these are, if everything is in numbers and if we understand how the numbers are sequentially just on number line and they do not have any other meaning, then maybe simply just averaging them out or just dividing by their range, not averaging out. Sorry, my bad. Dividing out by their range or taking the magnitude and dividing by magnitude, that will solve the problem. Okay.
Sure. Thanks.
All right. Okay. So what we are going to do is, and you guys can also write this code. The only problem is this code doesn't actually, the animation part, I have used a function. This doesn't work on Colab. Otherwise, I would have shown you the same code on Colab as well. Okay. So for this only, I have to go in my Anaconda prompt and run Python and everything. Wait. Just data. CD. So here I have to, I think, run Python 3 or Python. CLT demo.py. Okay, yes, running. Okay, don't worry. I will show you step by step. Don't get overwhelmed by this answer. So, and if possible, you guys can also run this, but make sure run on your local instance, not on Colab.
So this is one die roll or this is multiple die, two die roll?
I will explain you. Don't worry.
Can you share the collab?
Could you
link?
share the code?
Can you guys not write it? It's not that hard. Okay, so look, there are three major libraries that you have to import. Okay, NumPy, PyPlot, and animation. Okay, let's cut down this simulation. Okay, so we wanted to do it originally for, let's say, 1000, and we will do it for 1000. Okay, but right now let's start with a very small simulation like 5, or maybe let's start with 5 actually. Just to show you that what is going to happen. Let's create a list of average. Again, you can do it through NumPy a bit better. So we will try to do it, although it's not completely NumPy here. Okay, so for I in range from 2 to n. Okay, so here how much iterations it is going to run? Can anyone tell me? So remember, in each simulation, there is one more trial than the previous simulation. So because we are trying to average out, so it is die roll, guys. Die has 6 sides. Remember? So in each simulation, let's say we start with 2. So first we have 2 die rolls, which we do. We get the outcome in both and we average it out. Okay. Then next time we will have 3. Next time we will have 4 until 4 because we cannot go till 5 here. So there is just one more trial than the previous simulation. Okay. So every time, to answer your question, number of die rolls are basically increasing. Okay, so what do we do is for this in range, we take a random value from 1 to 7, not 7 excluding of course. And how many outcomes I want randomly? I outcomes. So first it will be 2 outcomes. In the next iteration, it will be 3 outcomes. Next 4. That's it. Okay. And we are going to append all of this. And basically we are going to get average. So in this list, average. So we will have just average of all the values. So right now, because I'm taking very less values, I should not take it like this big. And then what I have to do is basically I have to plot it. Okay. I will give you the code anyways. Maybe this is a PY file. So I will upload it in the Google Classrooms anyways. Okay. So what we are going to do is we are going to run a function where we are going to plot. So we will first try to understand how big this will go. So this is kind of a flag which tells us should we stop or not. And then you just have to plot and you have to annotate how many die rolls. And then basically this figure will be called this function. And then basically we will just run this function through animation package, which is provided in Matplotlib anyways. And now we are going to get an animation, which I showed you already. So let me run this. So there would be printed something. So let's say we will get some averages, that some averages 2.5, 4.0 that you observe. See, initial observation is, and you can see that it is all over the place. Maybe I will do it with 10 simulations now. Miss 10 runs minimum. So it should go till like, let's say 5. Okay. Always make sure to save the file first. Otherwise the previous results will come back. Okay. Okay. Uniform distribution. Anyone can tell me it looks like the uniform distribution right now? Almost. It is not completely, but almost. Right? By any means, does it looks like a Gaussian distribution?
No, it looks like a normal.
Yeah, not normal, uniform.
Not normal. The first one.
Because in statistics, anyone says normal, you always have to think a Gaussian. You should not think uniform. Uniform is different, normal is different. Okay, cool.
Yes.
So I ran it 10 times. Let's run it slightly more times, 25 times, and make sure, it depends how many of you want to print this out. And let's change this value to 25. Actually, in the previous one, I did not change this value. Okay. Okay. Close enough, but still it's not, you cannot call this normal, to be very honest. Okay. Still it might be lopsided on one side. Okay. But you will see that the tendency, and you can see there are a lot of values which are going to be closer to 3.5 or something. Okay. So 3.0, 3.33, okay, 3.09, 3.8. So you will see there is a small oh, sorry. Oh, so sorry. Wait. CLT Python. Okay. So it always takes a different mean because again, I have not set any kind of random seed here. Okay. And do not put a random seed. Every time it needs to do something different. So it should start with some different seed value. And hopefully in longer run, we will be able to see. So more you run, let's try to run it for 100 times. And to stop it again, we will give it 100 so that the animation stops. Now you will see a certain tendency that it is gonna be centered around, let's say 3.5 or any mean value that we choose here. And most of the values, and okay, sorry. Maybe let's represent more values this time because we are just looking at very less amount of values. So we will try to get like first 19 values and just see what happens. So let's increase the simulation to 200 this time. Here, let's make it 200, save and run it again. And you will see as I'm averaging out more values, there's that tendency of that Gaussian that is gonna occur now. Around 3.5, it will definitely happen because the maximum value is 6, lowest value is 1. So 1 plus 6 is 7 divided by 2. Let's say even if it is the most simplest die roll, you are gonna get something close to 3.5. Where? This function pld.cla.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so basically it has to keep track of the animation. So basically it keep tracks of the source, that when to stop, and then you can internally plot all the details. So when you want to do this in the animation, so if you want to use this animation function, so Matplotlib has animation package as well. So over there, it needs to keep track of number of frames and what to produce in these number of frames. So let me just show you. Okay. So we are going to use a function animation here. So basically you will have to give some kind of a callable iterable, and basically you have to define that what should be done in each frame or how many frames we are working with. Okay.
Can I ask you one thing? I am actually using Plotly also, and
Fine.
I'm
Plotly.
Plotly for some project. I mean, I just stored some data in MongoDB and retrieve it, and Plotly was much more convenient as compared to Matplotlib.
Yeah, of course, it is much more convenient, no doubt about it. Even in our company right now, we are using Bokeh and Plotly itself.
Okay, okay. So is there any use of using Matplotlib or Seaborn,
Look,
or we
it is
can
like,
rely on single?
yeah, you can rely on anything to be very honest. A good data scientist knows how to make good use of whatever tools are available with them. Look, for any professional looking graphs and stuff, I do not recommend Matplotlib to anyone, to be very honest. I will recommend you Bokeh. Even Seaborn is better than Matplotlib. Plotly is definitely much 10 times
Because
better.
Plotly has a feature of that parallel hover structure and all those things.
Yeah, of course. But Plotly is like much more interactive as well. But
Hmm.
once you are learning, like that is not the concern for a lot of people. They just want to get started. They just want to understand how to call this function. And Matplotlib understands SciPy, NumPy, Pandas, Matplotlib. These have become like the core foundations, like for data science, in a lot of books and stuff. So it is like, how do I say? It is like a trend that has been going on for let's say last 10 years or 12 years.
Okay.
And that's why people are learning Matplotlib. Again, I'm not advertising that Matplotlib should be used by everyone, but immediately if I show you Plotly code, maybe a lot of people will have even more questions.
Hmm. Got it.
So that's why we can't go ahead and immediately start doing it like that. But okay. So guys, this time I think I increased the overall die roll to 500. And again, you guys can experiment as much as you want. Okay, and you will see there is definitely a centering around the mean, the middle, 3.5 around. And it will start to look like almost a Gaussian jump. It will look like a very sharp one. Again, you can increase the number of maybe observations or maybe different kind of die roll or maybe different kind of outcomes you can also try to plot here. Again, try to do it as randomly as possible. But you will see there is a very sharp bell curve that comes, and initial distribution could be anything. Means you can keep drawing with 5 or 6 simulations, and the initial distribution looks like anything. It never like is similar. And once if it stops, you can like always draw this, and you can figure out like it goes like this, and it brings down like this. It is much sharper. Sorry, I could not draw it like that. But it always just happens. Like after a while, if you just take random values and you just average them out, and if you were just to plot it, you will get the same issue all the time. Okay, and so this is like I will not say like say 100% reality in all the cases, but in lot of cases, this is what the idea of CLT is fundamentally. That if you just keep doing any experiment, even if your initial variables look like any other curve, if you just keep averaging them out. So basically, this is the idea that a lot of people basically play around, that if you keep averaging it out, it starts to look like a Gaussian distribution after a while anyways, or close to any kind of bell curve, to be very honest. Okay, if you guys want to run the code, what I can do is, okay, I think in Zoom we can share a file, right? I'm not sure. Yeah, I think I can share the file. So let me just put this file in Zoom here as well. And later what I will do is I will also upload the same file. Where is my data folder? I will upload this data folder, sorry, CLT file over. Okay, so I have sent the file to everyone and you guys can download it and run it right now. Okay, so, okay, and all right. So guys, just give me like 5 minutes. Let's take a 5 minute break, okay? And after 5 minutes, we will just continue right from here. And meanwhile, in this 5 minutes, maybe you can run this code. You can change some variables and you can see how does it plots on your own library. Okay, just give me 5 minutes, and after 5 minutes, I will resume.
Can anybody let me know that what collab file is it and how it is different with Jupyter?
I think what he has shared is not collab file. It's a .py file.
Yeah. Means what actually collab file? Means anyone know? Because in that I have seen that.
I think it's just a Google version of Jupyter actually. So
Yeah,
it's
which
you can
also
check it out.
support to execute that Python file, Python
Correct.
program.
Correct.
Okay. Okay. Thanks.
आंटी है नहीं अभी, बाहर ही गई है, उधर ही गई है.
Hey
जाओ
guys,
फिर. हाँ.
hello. Hi, can you hear me? Hello.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right. So, did anyone get give this file a try? Means, did it run in your system?
Yes.
All right.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so do some
But
experiments.
the animation was not coming in Jupyter Notebook.
In Jupyter, I think there's the same problem. Try to run it from the console. In
So
Python,
that
it
is
will be
running from console. It is running.
yeah. So
Yeah,
console,
from console.
I have faced the problem in Colab. I'm not much of a fan of a Jupyter Notebook, so I think I'd never tried it on Jupyter either.
Okay. So in
So
Jupyter
it
is
was
also the same problem.
yeah. So I don't know why it doesn't it displays. I tried it in a different ways on Google Colab as well. It didn't work.
So the only solution that I have found is we can run it through HTML videos. I mean,
yeah,
we
that
need
is
to import display in IPython.display.
yeah, IPython display. Okay, so that is extra 5-6 lines extra. So maybe someday I will make that change to display through HTML, maybe in that frame. Okay, I will look into it once. Okay, but still, I think you get the gist of the experiment, and you can run different experiments. Okay, someone can maybe just simulate a die roll or some. You can experiment or try with some different kind of uh, outcomes as well, so that you can see this kind of averaging thing starts to happen, and it kind of starts to resemble a very sharp normal or a Gaussian curve, and that gives rise to the idea of CLT, or basically central limit theorem. That basically what it is pointing out as, that you can make a useful assumption that most of the time CLT will get involved anyways, because if you were to take large enough number of iterations or outcomes, and if you were to average them out, even if their initial distribution is something else, it will start to become close enough to a like a Gaussian curve. And based on that, we in statistics we do lot of inference, just based on this idea. It is not, again, I'm not saying all data points or all data distributions which or whatever data is provided is actually looking like a Gaussian. No, it is not. But because I know this question is going to come later, that's why we want to tackle it as soon as possible. That you will see, we will just make this Gaussian assumption a lot. Okay, that we will always assume data is somehow normally distributed, which is not the case in most cases. But that's how your foundation statistics are built, and that's how a lot of machine learning algorithms. Means one of the assumptions of those machine learning algorithms is data is normally distributed. And you might again stop to wonder like why. So again, there are two answers. One is CLT, but there is even a more blunt answer that because the math is simpler. Anyone knows the spherical cow or chicken joke basically? Anyone ever heard it? That is spherical cow joke.
No.
Okay, so I will tell you. It's a kind of a physicist joke. I think a similar version was also in TV series called Big Bang series, Big Bang Theory. It goes like this basically. So there is a basically this farmer who has cows, and one of the cows is not giving milk. And basically he didn't understand the difference between a physician and a physicist, so he called a physicist by mistake. So the physicist came and did some calculations on his notebook, and basically then said, okay, I have found a solution, but it only works for spherical cows in a total vacuum. Did you get that point? Like, what was the joke?
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes it will take some time to understand that joke. But okay, so what was the essence of the joke, or like why it is funny?
You can't create a spherical curve in.
No, that is not the funny part. It's the reverse part. Think about it.
You can't create
Is
vacuum.
not exactly. Just think.
Well,
Look,
a physician changes
And
the problem according to his convenience.
exactly. He dumbed it down so much. Like, okay, what do you do in physics usually? So you must have solved some high school physics. So how do you deal with force and pressure and these things? You consider it a point object or a spherical object where if the pressure or the force is applied, I hope you remember this idea, in this side, then basically you can explain it like going like this. But like cow is a very irregularly shaped body, right? So you cannot do all this math like this, that it will go out here. No, it will not, because the cow body is very irregular and it is cannot be called concentrated. You cannot think it as a solid concentrated point object, right? So he dumbed it down completely. He was like, okay, I will take a spherical cow, basic assumption in physics, and I will put this in vacuum, total vacuum, or in space, okay? And then my solution is gonna work. Okay, that is in practicality. So I want to make it very clear. Yes, we will take a lot of Gaussian assumption, and you will also feel like similar. That in a lot of times, why we always make this Gaussian assumption, the bluntest answer is because the math simplifies. Okay. Believe me, rest everything is just people just like to tell these things that this is the case, CLT is there. But actually, let me tell you the most blunt answer, because it will just simplify the maths where you will be able to easily solve it. Same way, a physicist kind of puts everything in a spherical or a point or center object and then puts it in a vacuum where there is no heat or energy transfer, extra or any surrounding heat or energy transfer of any kind. And then the math simplifies and you can actually do any kind of maths, right?
Or
So that
we
is
can also say that we have enough number of NumPy libraries to work on it. If we can reduce it,
NumPy
if it will.
libraries. I
I
did
mean,
not get.
the library, the functions.
Mhm.
So we in NumPy we have a lot of functions so that we can reduce the complete thing into the mathematics part of it. I mean, can we also say that? Like,
But that's the problem, right? A lot of functions, even when they have been written into NumPy, they have made the Gaussian assumption in their design of the algorithm itself.
yeah, of course, that's the reason why we will
Yeah,
be
yeah, yeah.
doing
Of course,
it.
we are constricted by because we all can't write algorithm from scratch, right? There's
Yeah.
another practical reason why a data scientist in an interview should tell that. Basically, sir, the environment, whichever Python, NumPy, Python R, whatever I work in, most of the algorithms, even I was telling you this random number generator, most of the time it just picks a random value from a normal distribution. So you can, it's not like I can't think about some other distribution where I could pick normal random values. It's just that most of the time we are going to use a package which is already predefined, pre-installed, and that itself will have made a lot of assumptions. And we will also have to deal with those assumptions. Okay. Again, that coin toss example, there are various variations. You go on internet, there are fights going on that. A lot of people will give you empirical evidence that basically there is a local bias. So sometimes it actually goes heads a lot of time before it ever comes back to tails. So if you are waiting for it to become tails, you might lose all the money in the casino. That is basically gambler's fallacy. That if you wait, like if you just think that if it has gotten 5 heads, it will immediately turn to 5 tails. No, it is not going to happen immediately. There is sometimes local tendency to go in slightly biased way and then correct after a long period of time. So you might lose all money by that time. Okay, so Miss, again, there are a lot of assumptions that we make just to simplify our maths and understanding. Otherwise, the sometime alternative is we will not get anything done. That is another problem. If we start going into this complex adaptive systems or complex systems, maybe you cannot get any math done. Then everything can be, every assumptions can be challenged. And if you start challenging every assumption, you might not be able to solve anything after a while because it just will consume too much time and then people will just give up. Okay, so that's why we simplify. We take some simple assumptions, and normal distribution or treating data as a normal distribution is actually one of them. Okay, which is not the truth in for most of the data, but that makes your life easier and at least you can get started. Okay, is this part clear? Like, because I want to stress this very strongly enough. A lot of people have asked me the same question again and again over again. It's like in different courses, even in deep learning as well. And I have to explain this half an hour, like almost every time, that it is not the case. But if you not to do it, then you will not be able to do anything as well. That is also true. So just be careful about this part. Okay. All right. So that is why we made this assumption.
Sir, if you can go back to the slide which you showed, that the different graphs, those that slide number 5. So what are the number of observations we are taking? When you say n is equal to 4, I presume you are saying we roll the dice 4 times, and then average would center around 14 because 3.5 into 4 is 14. But what is the number of trials you take?
Sorry. So that is the two dice that you have to throw around. Okay. That's why you will see the lower numbers will basically start to increase.
Yes, sir. So the way I'm assuming is
basically.
So what is the number of trials you are taking in this?
So n is equal to 2 means there is 2 dice, add both of their numbers. So the lowest number you can get is?
The lowest you can get is 2 and the maximum you can get is 12. Isn't it?
So see, your graph is kind of concentrated in this. So basically it is like if you were to do it for large enough number of times, basically the graph is trying to tell you something like this will start to happen if you have good random distribution, or if your random variable or random number generator is not biased towards something, then this is what you are ideally gonna get. And basically it is trying to show you that in any case, if we take n is equal to 3, n is equal to 4, n is equal to 5, it almost starts to look like it becomes close enough to.
So my question is, what is n? N is number of trials
number of dice thrown together.
Achha, so n is the number of dice thrown together. So that is what it is. And
one number is the sum. The x-axis is just the sum of the values.
Yeah, that I got. And the number of trials on an average is whatever you choose. That is that can be.
Choose a sufficiently large number. Okay, so let's call it 100, 200 trials. Of course, because sometimes till 20, 30 average times it is not even visible. Only after 50 or 100 times now it actually starts to be visualized. So we are not dealing with trials. They just plotted some graphs with different trial values, and that is the graph that is trying to show that most of the curves with the colors you can see is close enough to a Gaussian or a normal distribution.
Yeah, then it makes sense, because I was getting confused. This 65 by 648. I was wondering what's how that is, that the number of times 17 or 18 came in 648 trials, but I think I'm getting what you're saying.
No, that is nothing to do with it. It is just trying to show the probability for the maximum outcome that is now possible. Okay, the distribution will after a while look like this if you have large enough variation.
Okay.
And this is what they are trying to show you, that you can repeat it with different kind of experiments. And after a while, it almost starts to resemble a Gaussian or a bell curve.
Yeah, got that. Okay.
Remember this. So because this will be helpful. Okay. Now, one useful interpretation is, now I'm not going to go too deep in with the explanation here because the form kind of derivation is a bit long here. Okay. But still, I will just give you a simple idea that what it means is, what it is trying to say is the standard deviation of sample So X is standard deviation of sample, sigma X, is nothing but population sample divided by root of the sample size. Okay, so its derivation is long, but based on CLT, basically you can make this a small assumption that the deviation of sample size changes by the number of samples you take, because population standard deviation, let's say, is fixed. So how do you know what is the optimal size of n? Just based on this equation, how do you define what would be the optimal size of n?
Four
4. How did you get that?
means that will outcome a whole number.
So the standard deviation is the standard deviation of the sample from the standard deviation of population, or standard deviation is a standard deviation within the sample?
See, there are two different symbols, right? Observe.
Yeah, got that. So
Sigma X is
sigma
standard
equals the-
deviation of sample X, and sigma is the standard deviation of whole population.
yeah, okay.
Okay. So we don't have all the information actually. That is what I want to point out. You actually cannot make that distinction right now. Okay. Because if you were try to do like, okay, what if both of them are same? Let's say. So that comes to a very easy answer, right? But that is actually not the correct answer. So I can maybe do like something like this. And you can say like, what if both of them are same? So it becomes 1. So if you were to square both of the terms, what will happen? And becomes 1. Because it's a ratio, I can claim, or I can say basically what you are dealing here with is not one sample. You basically are saying you want 100% of the data. But that's not useful to us anyways, right? It's 100%, like then what am I doing here anyways? Like that is really easy. Okay, anyone can get like 100% the data. Means if you get the whole population, then there is no point of doing even a statistical inference itself. So that is the easy answer, because we don't have all the variables yet. There are some variables that are important to understand how things work. Okay. So let me put a question first, and then basically in search of that answer, we will try to determine a lot of statistical truths. Okay, let's say, so Coca-Cola basically says these 750 ml bottles. Okay. Earlier they were like 600 ml bottles as well, but I think most of the days I'm getting let's say this 750 ml bottle for let's say rupees 40 in India right now. Okay, so Coca-Cola claims it has 750 ml. Okay, just in case. One day, basically, I am like suspicious of Coca-Cola. I'm like, no, looks like the quantity is less. And I open it and I put, let's say, in a beaker or a measuring flask, and I actually see there is just 738 ml of liquid. So the content is just 738 ml. So tell me, can I go ahead and sue Coca-Cola?
There is a deviation which is allowed, so I don't think you can do it.
Okay, let's say the deviation is 5 ml or deviation is 10 ml. So let's say the deviation is a standard dev, okay? Or standard dev is, let's say not 10 ml, let's say it is 4 ml max. Then
it might be I should. You're saying can we sue Coca-Cola based on one bottle or multiple?
yeah, I got one bottle, let's say that
Okay.
got 738.
Okay.
Can I go ahead and sue Coca-Cola and say that they cheated me as a customer? I feel, can I go to consumer court and I say, and I should also win. Okay, it's just not that I can sue. Of course, I can sue anyone, right? But would I win that case?
No, the sample size that you're taking is very small. Like
Yeah.
the production size is too big.
Exactly. Maybe Coca-Cola makes millions of bottles. So even this 750 ml bottle. So this is just one part, but there is even another part that one needs to understand. What is the another part that I'm missing? No, Madhu. So the 750 ml is not the bottle, is the content. Actually, the bottle can actually hold a bit more than 750 ml. Means I have done the experiment. I have put some water over there, so I know how much it can actually hold. So
Okay.
750 ml, the Coca-Cola content they actually claim is not the bottle size. If anyone has a measuring flask, you can put that Coca-Cola over there and see how much it comes to. Usually it is close to 750 ml. Most of the days it will come close to 750 ml. Actually in USA I had a jar or jug or something. Oh no, I had a glass, I think macerated glass. And you would usually drink Coca-Cola from there. So I will put Coca-Cola in that. It was like a 1 liter glass. And I will see it will touch like 750 ml most of the days.
It also could be because my glass is bad to some
Sorry,
extent. How do I know? So there's a probability there.
sorry, I did not get it.
My measuring device is bad. There's
Fine.
probably
Let's say I get the best measuring device and it actually says it is 738 ml. So can you go ahead and sue Coca-Cola?
and because you asked a question that there's something we are missing. So I was just thinking, what are we missing?
No, let's say measuring device is not a problem. You measured it and it came 738 ml.
Okay.
Hello.
I think the level of confidence and hypothesis testing concept should come in here.
Exactly. Level of confidence is the problem, right? Okay, even when you see standard deviation, how far away from that standard deviation I am? But that is just one standard deviation. What if Coca-Cola claims in the code that, sir, fundamentally, statistically, I have to understand. Let's say we provide like 3 sigma testing or something like this, or 3 sigma quality assurance that we are trying to do. So 3 sigma will only cover till how many percentage points?
99.9.
99.7.
Okay.
So what it means is, let's say if 750 ml was somehow the mean, imagine this case, although they actually go for much bigger, and maybe I think they go for 5 sigma, 6 sigma. So it is very rare that I can ever get a bottle of 738, but it can still happen. Okay. So let's treat this process again as a random process. Again, the variability is too low. Okay. But still, let's say this is the first standard deviation. How many bottles will be covered in this range? So this
68%.
point,
64%.
this point is
68%.
746 ml and this is 754 ml. No consumer is gonna claim if gonna cry about if they get more. Okay, they're only gonna complain and sue if they get less. Agreed?
Yes.
So we mostly have to worry about this lower tail side. Okay, this is just one standard deviation. So this is gonna cover 68.4% of bottles only. Let's double the area, double the space, sorry. So in 2 standard deviation, I come to 742 ml and the upper one becomes 758. Again, no one cares about the upper part. How much percentage area I have covered? Means how many bottles, percentage of bottles we have covered? 95% in the total one. Let's say there lies the 738. And this will be like say 762, something like this. By this point, I have covered 99.7% of bottles. So Coca-Cola can simply come and say that, sir, even you got 738, still it is within 3 sigma, or it is almost touching 3 sigma. So one thing that a lot of people don't tell, and unless you do not look into specific documentation on the website or the PDFs that they provide in your doc, is the confidence score. So lot of times you will see like tolerance built in or error range provided. And we will talk about lot in hypothesis testing. Mu plus standard dev or a value or some value, let's say value plus minus some kind of error. This kind of operation you see a lot, right? In a lot of devices, especially electrical devices, you will see this. They will give you even your voltage, like your any device might also show you a voltage fluctuation or like how much it can handle. Have you seen this in your chargers or something? Like look in your laptop charger, you might actually find this one. So they can say like, okay, in India, 230 volts, but plus minus, it can maybe handle 40 or 50 volts maximum. Okay, let's say 50, something like this. So sometimes it is literally written in a range formula. It will say like it can go from 200 volts to 260 volts, something like this. So maybe 230 is the average. Okay. So in India, we do get like 220 volts mostly. So it's okay if it can run anywhere around 220. So that should be good enough, right? Now the problem is what they don't mention is confidence interval. Now in their technical documentation, it is actually mentioned. It is just not mentioned on a lot of devices because very few people really understand what it means. Okay, so we will talk about confidence interval as well. And even in hypothesis testing, confidence interval is really important to understand how it works. Okay. Again, remember all of these, all of this maths is just based on a Gaussian assumption. Okay. And you will see the point, like why I am saying this point. Okay. Because we have to do interval estimation. So we do not want to just do a point. Okay. So what was point estimation, or means you already have done point estimation? So what is point estimation? Like anything like mean, median, when you want to just locate something specific, you are trying to do a point estimation. Okay. But right now we want to do an interval estimation. Now interval estimation gets tricky. And I will show you where and how it will get tricky. So what is interval estimation? Basically this or this. That rather than you telling me that your bike will give you 45 or 50 kilometer per liter, you give me an interval. So you will say that, okay, my bike basically goes from somewhere from 45 kilometer to 55 or 54 kilometer on a 1 liter. Okay. Now this gets very tricky after a while, and you will see why. Okay, because there is this idea of confidence interval that also needs to be told here. So point estimation is easy. You kind of average it out, you get a median or you get a mode. But interval estimation, I want a value plus minus error or a mu plus minus standard deviation. Okay. So why are we doing this? Anyhow, first, let me ask you why we are doing this.
Because anyway we end up inferring things. So when we infer, it cannot be exact. So we try and give a
Because
range.
you have taken a sample, right? You have not taken a population. So you need to say plus minus, or you need to give some range how much you are going to wrong with. Right? You have not seen the whole population. You have taken maybe 1/10 to 1/20th of the whole population, maybe, and try to do some maths and try to come up with some answers. Okay. So again, you are just inferring about rest of the 95% of the data. If you take 5%, that is like 1/20th of the data. Basically, with that 5%, you basically want to infer that this will be the truth for the rest of the 95% as well. So there is of course margin of error here, right? That you are not going to get exact point estimation. That is wrong. Even if you give a point estimation, you are not telling the whole thing, or you're not telling the whole truth. So we want to understand this, that what is the interval estimate that we are running into or what we are working into. Okay, so again, even in your real life, you use interval estimate actually a lot. So can you think about some examples?
Weather forecast in terms of
Weather forecast is the complete interval estimation itself. But yeah, anything else?
Mileage?
Come on, like you can't take my example. Use yours.
a sales guy trying to estimate his salary end of the year depending upon
Yeah, because they have a commission-based salary. So yes, that could be a very good example.
Something called IPL score range. Like by end of this over, okay, there will be saying, right, like based on
Yeah.
run rate.
At different averages, you try to predict like what score they might actually end up into. right? So with different level of averages, how much score they might get into.
Yeah.
All right, that is one good one. Maybe ETA is also one of them, right? Even when Google Maps is showing you 5 or 10 minutes, you may need to consider 1 or 2 minutes up and down anyways, because things can change, right? So basically what you want to do is, what are the two fundamental problems in statistics?
Uncertainty and variance.
Very good, variation basically. So basically you want to counter both of them by doing interval estimation properly. Now point estimation can be answer to uncertainty, but again, because of variation, or maybe there is uncertainty even in measuring itself. So through interval estimate, you just want to be more confident, or you want to be just more, a bit more particularly sure about something. Okay, that how anything is gonna happen, what would be a good interval over there. You just want to be a bit more sure while you are making an analysis. Let's say you want to invest something in your stocks or land, gold, anything. So you want to estimate like after 2 years, 5 years, what would be the value. Now, of course, no one can tell you like what would be value of your property after 5 years. Exactly. But they can maybe give you a range that it would appreciate by 40% or 60%, right? So based on that, you make some, let's say, calculation. You are like, okay, I get a home loan. Let's say I put some 10 lakhs on my side. I get a home loan for, let's say, 40 lakhs or 50 lakhs, and I get this 2 BHK, let's say. Okay. And the hope is after 5 or 6 months, 6 years, the appreciation would be definitely beating, let's say, what is the home loan interest is how much right now in India? 8 or 9, 8.5. I'm forgetting the exact value, guys. Sorry.
8.5
Around
around
8, I think.
8.5, right? Most banks are around at 8.5, 8.25, 8.5, right? Something like this. My dad was telling me, I think a few days back. So 8.25, or let's consider 8.5. So you have to beat that range minimum plus inflation. 8.25 is just bank's rate. What about inflation? Because if you have 50 lakhs right now, even in retail, inflation is like what, 5 or 6% in India right now. So you have to, let's say, even if I have 1 lakh right now, let's say, so next year, this 1 lakh should get converted to 1 lakh 5,000 and bit more. Okay, so I'm taking less than 5 lakhs so that there is no income tax and stuff. So I'm not going beyond 5 lakh because then there is income tax as well. So let's say even if you make 5,000 rupees, which is FD basically, 5.1, 5.25 is FD in India right now. So you are hardly making any money even by just putting an FD. Okay, so that's why people like to invest in different things. So you have to understand to beat inflation and to beat income tax as well. On an average in India, you need to do close to 12% if your salary range is anywhere 10 lakh or something. Okay. So you need to do 12%. Okay. But this is why whenever you read some investment documents about mutual funds and maybe about land you want to know, or maybe about a property in some apartment setting and stuff, you want to understand how much it will appreciate. Again, no one can actually tell you, even if someone is selling that, so it will definitely appreciate, or like it will become twice in 5 years. Basically, they are just lying to you. Okay, no one actually knows this. But what you could do is, you can maybe take a statistical inference. Maybe you can, if you can collect some data, you can come to some observations that how much it would appreciate, maybe in 5 years, 4 years, so that you understand that you will beat income taxes plus the inflation plus the bank interest. Okay, so that actually comes to close to 14-15%. If you're not doing 14-15% on an average, believe me, you are actually in loss if you take a property, because again, property is a kind of an immovable object, and it is not easy to liquidify or liquefy. So like you have to maintain like 14% or 15% rise, otherwise you are just in loss after a while. So again, you have to do this. So why I'm asking about interval estimate? Because you want to cover your bases. Let's say the best percentage is, let's say someone comes to you and says that your growth will be, aggregated growth will be anywhere from 14 to 16 or 17%, okay, on this property or whatever per year. Now, of course, no one knows it. There is so much variation. So at 14%, you might be just at no profit, basically. Maybe it's not a loss as well, no loss, no profit scenario. But you are also not making profit, but you intended to go and get a property to get some profit after a while. 17% is the optimistic part, let's say. And mostly you think somewhere there you are gonna lie, okay? But if you do the statistical inference correctly, if you just ask about two, maybe one or two flatmates, or maybe some one or two, like how do I say, Miss, maybe you ask the apartment guy or the developer itself, of course, they will give you a very optimistic projection. They will say 20%. But if you do your own maths and if you come to know like how much the properties nearby in nearby area has appreciated and how many new projects are coming in this area, you will be yourself able to do a better maths and try to understand what is going to happen with your money. And you should do it, okay? I always tell people you should financially plan well and think about these things very carefully. So it has real-time advantages. Again, now why industries and corporations will need it? Same reasons, just on a much bigger scale. Maybe a company is thinking in millions and billions of dollars, millions or maybe billions of dollars. Okay, so when they are putting this billions of dollars in their machinery and employees and infrastructure, whatever they want to build and develop, they are thinking in terms of returns. Now they also have to be understanding that how much market return are we gonna get. So if India's growth economy or GDP is like this, so by 5 years, if we put millions or if we take 10 millions as loan, what is going to really happen? So you can do a statistical inference. I'm not saying that you know everything, but even by taking a reasonable enough sample size and having a realistic error margin, you can still do a very good projection. And that is why knowledge of statistics is paramount when you want to become a financial instructor or like not instructor, like an analyst or a security risk manager or something. You need to understand all of these basics. And again, these same things will crawl into data science as well, because again, once you will be dealing with such kind of data, you will need to know that how or what can go wrong or how much my results can vary. Okay. So if I get a model which accuracy is 88%, so I cannot say 88%. I need to understand that it will fluctuate based on the randomness of the data or the variance of data. So how much it is going to fluctuate. So tell me which model is better, just in a generic sense. I have two models, M1, let's say, and M2. It is kind of a A/B testing, to be very honest, if you think about it. So this gives you 88% plus it has 7% variance or 7% standard deviation or something. The other model gives you 86%, but only plus minus 2%. Which model you should trust more?
M2,
Okay.
model 2.
But I never told you the confidence interval. So how do you know? Understand the problem first. I never told you the confidence interval. So how can you make this decision?
Yeah.
You need to know the confidence interval first. Yes, it looks same. Okay, I will tell you what a lot of companies will do. So let's say a company comes and they both will publish like this kind of result. They have a precision tool, let's say. So it needs to be 5 mm mostly, and they will give you a very small lesser deviation. Okay, this company sells something at, let's say this tool is sold at rupees 500. Okay, a new company comes and they want to disrupt the market and stuff, and they want to price things cheaper. They also say 5 mm plus minus 0.01 mm, but they are selling it for rupees 200. Which one you are gonna buy? Remember, it's a precision tool. Okay. Okay. Again, same issue. I never told you the confidence interval. So maybe this does a Six Sigma testing, or it has maintains a very high. Let's just go till 99.7. And this only maintains 95%, 2 sigma itself. Now you see the problem.
Yes.
Yeah, so many times if just a thing is cheaper, and especially in like these precision tools and machinery, one needs to be actually very careful. Okay, maybe read the documentation twice or thrice to understand are they lying through the stats part or already or what, because the interval looks same, the range, sorry, interval range, but the confidence is not the same actually. And that makes a lot of difference, because what they are saying is the second company, if they publish this and if you forget to read it, it's your mistake, of course. They are saying that only 95% of my tools are in this range. These guys are saying, no, my 99.7% tools are in this range. Understand the difference? And it's a precision tool, so a very small change in the tool can make a lot of difference or might not be usable at all. So you will be losing money if you buy the 200 ones and if you get one or two faulty pieces. So the getting chances of having a faulty piece is much higher in the second company. Just even by the stats, forget the real time what is happening.
So, sir, the way I read this is on a standard deviation that
It's just error range. Forget the standard. I never said it's a mean or standard deviation. It's just the error range that they have published. We will talk about it.
Okay.
When they might be using standard deviation or what. But even just as the error range, if I were to look at their confidence interval, I can say basically what they mean is 99.7% of their tools exist in this range, whereas the other company, although because let's say people don't understand confidence interval, a lot of people. The other company is just claiming my 95% tools are only in this range. So there is a higher chance of getting a faulty piece with the second company, even, and because they are not maintaining that level of precision. So maybe they are trying to cut corners, or they have already cut corners in their production way or the production manufacturing facility. And that's why they might be able to develop things cheaper, but because it's a precision tool, then it might not be usable as well. Are you getting the idea, like where I'm going at and why we are trying to understand this idea? Because right now I'm just laying the foundation here. The maths will start, but just want you to understand this point first.
So basically, in the second example, the normal distribution curve will be more spread, right?
Yeah, it will be more spread. Yes, you're right.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can say quality control is this is basically for a lot of manufacturing terms, this is what quality control will look like after everything. This is what like Six Sigma quality control and these things are fundamentally. You want to ensure most of the products are in the same acceptable range. They should not go out and be anything, right? So now let's look at the statistical basis, how to do these things, okay? Because that is really interesting. So we will be dealing with sigma unknown cases, okay? And the issues will be like determining the sample size, population proportion, okay? So first, let's say understand the basic idea. So basically what happens is we have to deal with margin of error for the reasons I already told you. So a point estimator cannot be expected to provide the exact value of population parameter, because again, you just took a sample. So how can you get the exact population parameter? So interval estimate can be added by computed by adding and subtracting a margin of error. Now the purpose of interval estimate is to provide information about how close the point estimate is to the actual value of the population parameter. Okay, let's see how we can do it. So the idea is, or the hope is, I give good enough range that even if I'm wrong, I'm not really wrong by much. So let's say this is the actual mu. Okay, this red mu is actual for the population. So this is about the population. And you can always think about your own experiment that you did. Okay, and let's say your is mu of x is yours. Okay, this is your sample. So let's say if someone is asking you a result, so let's say population parameter is 500. So you can say, sir, I got, let's say 499, but let's keep an interval estimate. Let's keep an open mind, plus minus 3. But again, it doesn't tell you the whole information, but still, let's just first deal with this part. So what you do is, by doing this, what did you just do?
I covered up a range.
Yeah, basically you covered your own mistake. Okay, so what you just told is basically, sir, the thing or the mean can go from here to here, and let's say the actual one is 500. So no one can really complain, can they? And it's good, right? You might have just used 1 or 2% of data and you were able to come up with this range, and the population parameter is 500. So that's not really bad, is it? just by using a very small amount of data. If you can get this kind of inference, you will be saving yourself and your company and your clients a lot of time. Because when we will deal with GBs and TBs of data, then you will understand the problem that you will might not be able to work with all of the data at all. Anyways, although we do have a lot of powerful computers now, even Google Colab instance is really powerful to handle. Means I have myself worked on 20 GB data sets with Google Colab already. Means you will have to increase your drive size a bit, but it is totally doable. But by doing this, you can make an inference from a smaller sample. And again, I told you, right? Many times it might not be even the money issue. It's not might be financial. People are just not willing to participate. Then what? So you will take a sample and you will try to make up an inference about large number of people. And the hope is you get it right. So again, you cannot get it right by a point estimation. So you will come up with an interval estimation. And the hope is somewhere the global truth or the population truth will also lie in that. And if it does, it's good news because you might have just used 1 or 2% of sample and overall from the overall population, and you still got the results. So definitely you did your task right, or you got your work done correctly.
So, sir, real life situation, we will never have the mu for population, am I right? Because that's what we are trying to avoid. So then, what do you do? What does one do?
Sorry, again, you are saying that I will never have the mu of the population, right?
Yeah, because if I had that, then a lot of problems.
Okay, but not think about it. Even if I do not have the mu for the whole population, let's say I want to sell something. Okay, so based on I will go to 100 or 200 people, and I will try to sell something, and based on that, I will get an estimate that this is what's going to happen in the future as well. So let's say I launch an all India campaign for selling a product, which is let's say relevant to a lot of people. Okay. Now, of course, I cannot do a maths and I cannot go to everyone's house and ask this question that would you be able to, or would you be interested in buying this product? So at some time, the global truth will prevail at some point after 1 year of your launch. And if you have done your marketing right, and if your pricing is also in a very good estimate, and let's say if you do not have too much competition at that point, the global truth will prevail anyways. At some point, your global population mu is going to come in play anyways. Even if you cannot calculate it, after an yearly sales, it will be determined that how many people your campaign reached, and then how many people ever bothered to buy it. So even if you are making this inference, it is meant for, let's say, 1 year or after 4 fiscal quarters or something. At some point, it is going to happen anyways.
Got it. So basically, my global truth then again will tend to be a larger sample over years, historical data, and that is what becomes my.
Exactly. Like if someone wants to sell me a new credit card, so first they have to see the feasibility of that credit card, right? Like, okay, fine. So even I think this will be applicable to Indian as well as US people here. So I guess you understand. So do you understand the difference between normal like these your Visa and Master credit cards and Amex credit cards?
You're saying the difference between the Visa,
Visa and MasterCard, like you can get it almost in USA. You can almost get any Visa or MasterCard for 0% APR and stuff. And in India, also we can get without any annual payment. Okay, we don't have like 0% APR, I guess, in India as of now. So almost all banks will sell you something like zero annual. So they will ask you to spend something, and they will say there is no annual cost. One of my friend is in Amex. Okay, now Amex is the costly one. Okay, so Amex, many times even just to get the card you have to pay a fee, like which I will of course never do. And then there is definitely an yearly charge. Okay, so I just asked them like, what is your estimate? Like you cannot operate on the scale of the Visa or MasterCard, because then technically Visa and MasterCard can be given to a person who might be just earning 10,000 rupees. Your sign up fee is like 10,000 rupees. How can anyone like on that population, if you consider that person as your population parameter or in your population to be sold, that then you are really wrong here. So yeah, they also like focus on 10, 12 major cities in India, and they mostly focus in the people living there and earning like more than 5 lakhs or 4 lakh rupees minimum in India. Otherwise, you are just not a potentially a Amex customer anyways. They are not even considering you on the overall Indian population who will ever buy Amex cards, credit cards. So of course you will have to do this estimation and then think about how, and again, you can only access or survey a very small amount of people. So you will have to come up with some projection, right? He's in sales over there. So he have to worry about these things, and he has to think, okay, if this was last year, then how much more credit cards we will be able to sell to people this year. So of course, this has to be done. Anyways, the global truth or population truth will prevail. Of course, there are like marketing campaigns and whatnot. There is a whole discussion. How can you influence someone's psychology? That's another discussion. Okay. But even in a general sense, if every company is doing same amount of effort, then who will be able to sell more? At some point, it is going to be visible, right? At least sales data and financial data will not lie about this. We will know about this anyways. So I think that's my point fundamentally.
I got that. I got that.
So if you come up with a point estimate, sir, that I will sell 500,000 cards this year, and if you don't, your boss is gonna may fire you, or you. So what you will sell is, sir, we will sell anywhere around 450,000 to 520,000 cards in this year. And if the global truth or that final year report says the same thing, then you are safe, right? You made that position. So that is the point I'm trying to say here. That if you try to do a point estimation, you are mostly going to be wrong. In most cases, you're going to be wrong. So just do an interval estimation, and then you are statistically guaranteed to succeed most of the time.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so there are two cases, guys. One case is, first case we will start with is called where we already know the population standard deviation. Although even this is rare case. Not every data has population standard deviation either. But let's say if you had population standard deviation as well as the sample standard deviation. So again, we are showing you very clearly here. Sigma, this sigma means population standard deviation. So in this, mostly I will be using two symbols. Try to understand this. Whenever I say sigma, mostly I'm talking about the population standard deviation. So please do not get confused. Either I will use S or sigma X. Okay. This means sample standard dev. So whenever I write just small sigma, just sigma, always understand I'm talking about population. Again, mu is global, means population mean, and mu x is sample mean. Because these signs will always occur, so I just want to make sure that you understand. Sigma is rarely known exactly, but maybe through historical data, you can come up with a good estimate that what will be the global or population sigma. Okay. Such cases are referred as sigma known cases. Okay. Now, actually, I should start with this picture.
Sorry to interrupt. Actually, in the fourth slide, did we miss something? Like we were discussing about optimal sample size, right?
Yeah, so I just told you if you were to take a proportion, it should be 1. Then that is not a new information, right? We already know this. That if I were to take 100% of the data, of course, I will get the exact mu, and there is no error in the estimation of the mu. The problem is I don't want that. I want the optimal size. So to get the optimal size, first you will have to interval, or you have to come up with how much error you are gonna proceed with. So first we will have to do the math to just get the error, that how much error is even I'm allowed to have.
Okay, so we are going bottom up.
Yeah, basically that's what we are doing. So I gave you the top of the tree idea first, and now I'm explaining how can you reach over there.
So, sir, and in that case, is the percentage, right? Like when n is 100%, then n is 1, and when n is 50% of the population as sample size, then n is 0.5. That's what
you can think it as a ratio, right? No, that 1 means 100% of the data. So again, what is the new news there? Like 100% data, of course, I will get the exact value.
Okay.
Okay, first we will have to talk about a distribution which is called Z distribution, which is nothing. It's just a normal distribution, but with two important points. In Z distribution is just a standard normal distribution. Okay, it is called the standard normal distribution. Mu is now in Z distribution, mu is always 0 and standard dev is always 1, and of course variance is also 1. So can anyone tell me what the equation of Z distribution is going to look like now? Given these two ideas, what the values will look like? Overall equation will look like? Make sense? Anyone remembers the actual equation? Normal distribution? And x minus mu square by divided by 2 sigma square. Okay, this is just the variance, nothing else. So just substitute mu as 0 and sigma as 1 and you should get this exact equation.
Yes.
Clear to everyone? How did I get the z distribution value? And again, it follows all the rules of normal distribution. So what it means is, and I will just use this picture itself. Again, now the mean will always be at 0 here. And the standard deviation is 1. Okay, that is what standard, yes, okay. So basically, it's a very simple idea that from -1 to 1, you will again contain 68 point maybe 4% of data. From -2 to 2, it's almost, it's actually 94.7 or something, but we always take it as 95. And from -3 to 3, it will take 99.7% of data, right? Any problem here? Like if you have any issues, you can just ask me right now.
So how come that mu in that Z distribution, which is 0, coming on peak,
Sorry, I did not
that
get.
here that mu is equal to 0. So that peak, what we are saying, that should fall towards 0 now.
No, sorry. Okay.
I'm not sure I'm wrong.
Yeah, don't worry. Okay, so if you remember the axis, so this is x and this is p of x. Understand?
Oh, sorry.
So if this is 0 and this is less than negative -1. So sorry, this equation is saying is, what is the probability that most terms or terms will be 0? So let's assign some probability randomly, 0.17. So this is where it's gonna peak, and the idea is this will be the highest probability anyways, and then it will start to come down.
Got it. Function I forgot. Yes.
Yeah, probability distribution. It is called probability distribution. So probability will get involved. Okay, but it's called PDF, probability distribution function.
Sorry, I forgot that.
Okay, yeah, please. This is why I tell you to revise things, because whatever we are studying, it is just gonna be following on whatever you already know, or if you do not know, then again same problems will happen. Okay, all right. So I guess this is clear. What just happened here? It is just simple z distribution is nothing, but it is very useful to find the probabilities and the percentile of any kind of normal distribution, and we will show you that it basically serves as a standard against all the against which all the other normal distributions are measured. And basically remember, z distribution is just a normal distribution with a mean 0 and standard deviation 1. That's it. It follows all the rules of normal distribution. So let me show you a picture first, and I hope let me just go full screen here. What do you see here, guys?
IQR median box plot.
Exactly. So basically, we are trying to show a connection here. We are just trying to show a connection in so this is your z distribution. So what we are trying to show here is this. If you were to take -1 to 1 standard deviation, it would cover 68.27. This is why let's call it 68.3% of distribution. Okay. But what about the middle 50% IQR? How much is the data? We will show you how to calculate all of these values as well. So it is from negative 0.6745 to positive 6.45. And for outlier detection, we mostly go for this standard of Q1 minus 1.5 IQR and Q3 plus 1.5 IQR. Okay, that actually happens to be 2698 sigma and 2698 sigma in the positive direction as well. So this is just slightly less than 3 sigma, to be very honest. Okay, so I will show you. There is a z distribution table actually, and over there we can read these values and we can understand how did we get it. Okay. So if you were to find the middle 50%, now understand this is the middle 50%. Okay, this is what this median idea is showing, and because it is balanced, the median and mean are the same things. So understand. So basically, I will ask you to do outlier detection or outlier removal basically. based on this part. So you will, what you will do is you will basically try to kill any point. Basically, imagine your data as a normal distribution. Okay, so you will try to kill any point which goes beyond this, either beyond this range, or you will try to kill any point which goes beyond 3 sigma. Okay, just give me one moment. Okay, so did you understand what did I just tell you here? In percentage of area, you have to first think in percentage of area. Now, okay, first remind me, what will happen if I integrate from negative infinity till positive infinity?
100% data will get covered.
Exactly. But technically you cannot reach infinities, right? So this is like most of the standard graphs, they will not go beyond 6 sigma. And again, believe me, 6 sigma is very close to 100%, but it is not 100%. Also remember that. Gaussians extend from negative infinity till positive infinity. So any extreme outlier can also happen. We are assuming that is true. But most of the time, most of the values will be really. So I'm forgetting how much IQR covers. Okay, I'm forgetting the exact value. It is somewhere 99%. Okay, that much I guess I will look it up. I think it is 99% exactly. Okay, and 3 sigma, if you were to go for 3 sigma, it will be like 99.7%. I will have to look in the G chart and then I can tell you immediately how much it takes. Okay, so yeah, this is the point, that outlier would be what? Any extreme point here, like this could be positive outlier, this could be a negative outlier, right? So what I'm saying is either take the 99%, you just choose like 99% of data and kill anything that goes beyond this range, or you can go like 99.7% by 3 sigma and kill anything beyond 3 sigma in positive and negative direction. This is the some basic outlier removal techniques through simple statistical techniques. Get the idea what I'm saying here?
Yeah.
Okay, we will see it. Don't worry. Next class mostly, I will do this operation on pandas, and you can see this how to do this. Okay, but just remember this chart, or and I will. I think I have already uploaded this file, right? I'm forgetting. If not, I will upload it again. But I think I have already uploaded this file yesterday only. So please go through it before the class, the next class happens, because these pictures are really important. Otherwise, people get really confused after a while. Okay, I hope you understand the sigma. Now, if it is standard deviation, sorry, if it is actually Z distribution, we should not even bother writing sigma because we know what sigma is. It's just 1. So you can think as -6, -5, -4 till 0, then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Because it's a standard Z distribution. So maybe that's how we should think about. Everyone is clear so far?
So in the uniform distribution and this standard distribution, means why we are using this Z distribution, means
Sorry.
why is it required? I'm getting it.
Okay, the again simple answer is calculation is easier. First of all, if you were to integrate Z distribution, it is easier to find. Z tables are available online, which you will have
but
to.
Sir, in real practice, we can't get that mean or central tendency will be 0.
No. It's a comparison basis. Okay, let me show you. You will not get it. That's okay. That's totally fine. That is not where was going to go at anyways. I am just trying to show that we can get a comparison basis on against which you can compare any kind of normal distribution.
Okay, for comparison basis.
Yeah. you can think this as a unit normal distribution. Against this, you can compare any normal distribution. Okay.
Okay.
That is why we are doing all this.
Okay, means for measurement like mu and sigma that we following this standard deviation.
Yeah, that's why we are doing it. I'm not
Okay.
saying that you will get this in data set. No, it will not happen.
Mhm.
But based on this assumption and these area calculations, I will show you what this means after a while. Based on this area calculation that you are seeing this area, this can be actually calculated, and then you can figure out how much your Z value was. Or if you know Z value, you can calculate how much your overall value was. Okay. So let's say 2.98, right? Let me just check the graph once, just because I just want to be sure about something. But 2.698, so 2.69. Let me look in the graph 1 point. So you go to 2.6 and 9 is 99.64. But you will have to cancel out a bit. I think it is 99.5, I guess. Now. Okay, no problem. I will tell you how much is that range. No problem. So basically, it will serve as a comparison basis for any kind of normal distribution that we will deal in future. That's why we are taking Z distribution. Okay, it's just a mathematical tool. That's all. Okay, now
is it kind of a normalization of a normal distribution?
Yeah, that's why I called you unit. You can think it as a unit normal distribution.
Yeah.
Okay, so interval range is some range that you will have to define mu plus minus. It can be in terms of sigma or it can be in error range. Okay, both are okay. If it is error range or something, then you might have to figure out how much is the sigma or something. And okay, so if the error range is this is, let's say, the error range, or this is the range which is acceptable. And if it is two-tail means distribution can also go in this direction and in positive direction. Then these are referred by alpha by 2. Okay. So error is nothing by, if you think about, so the overall area of the curve can be referred as, overall area of this curve is
1.
Very good, because the probability. So of course, if you were to integrate it from negative infinity till positive infinity, you will get 1. So the idea is, again, we are dealing in terms of area, guys. Remember this part. Be very careful. So we are not dealing in number line. We are dealing in the area. So try to understand. Basically, I'm talking about this area that I'm covering, not the number line. Okay. So in this area, if this is your error range, mu plus minus error, okay, which is basically, let's say, this whole thing. Okay, then what is outside is referred as alpha by 2. If it is two-tail, okay, two-tail means it is also going in positive direction, also in negative direction. Then the error is nothing but, if you think about it, 1 minus alpha. Or range, sorry, error range. Actually, I should not say error. I should say error range. Error range area is nothing but 1 minus alpha. Okay. So anything going beyond, let's say this is the area, this is 1 minus alpha, this is your error range. So imagine at mu, you have your mean, and again, it starts to go down. Let's say. Okay. So the idea is, if this area is alpha by 2, remember alpha by 2. And this area is alpha. Again, it's going to be symmetrical. My drawing might not look like this, but it is going to be symmetrical. Alpha by 2. So the error area is 1 minus alpha. So this error range will have area of 1 minus alpha. And this alpha is called level of significance. Level of significance. Okay.
So when you, so when you took 3 sigma on both sides, then error range is that 99.3%. And what was the second term you wrote?
No, so that's alpha basically.
No, what is alpha called? Error, something.
Alpha is level of significance.
Level of significance. So level of significance becomes 0.35, no, 0.7%.
Yeah, no, we will calculate it. Don't get.
I'm just trying to verbalize what you just. I'm just trying to put that picture in my mind.
We will calculate it, no doubt. So yes, over there you can think when if I were to take 3 sigma like this, then this error area is 99.7%. So alpha is
Then then alpha is 0.3.
very good. But given if it was one tail, otherwise we will have to deal in alpha by 2 and that will be even smaller. Because again 0.03 means the rest of the area which is outside 3 sigma, but it is outside 3 sigma in 2 directions. Because it is symmetrical, let's say. So 0.03 that you got is the correct answer, but it is outside in both the regions, right? In the negative side as well as the positive side. Can you see that?
Sorry, sir. I said 0.3. I think it should not be 0.03. 0.3.
Oh, sorry, my bad. 0.390. Yeah, my bad. It is actually 0.3. You are right. Yeah, so alpha by 2 is 0.15.
1.5. Yeah.
Anyways, okay, it doesn't matter. We are like after a while you will see this is also not right, because anyways probability value is maximum 1. So basically what you will get is very small value. This is like in percentage terms, so that is why still it is looking decent. In probability terms, that will be even smaller. Means this will be the value. Okay, fine, it doesn't really matter. Even if you take 0.3%, you have to understand, because if it's a two-tail problem, there is some area in positive direction and then some area left out in negative direction. Considering both sides are symmetrical, so from the mean, both sides are symmetrical fundamentally, then what happens is you have to take alpha by 2. Imagine this area is alpha by 2, which is outside 3 alpha. And this area is also alpha by 2, which is outside this. So this area is just nothing but 0.15% or okay guys, so I'll like to stop the lecture for today, and next class we will continue with the same idea. I will really encourage you guys to revise